All right, Isaac, here we are again, bright and happy and full of beans and ready to go again. We're actually up to Atonement Lesson 4, but I want you to do something for me here. I've looked over what we've done and I've realised we've come a long way pretty quickly, and we haven't really given the time that's needed to what we've done as far as this is concerned. I want you to go back and read carefully again Genesis 2, 1 to 18, the story of Abraham and Isaac. I want you to go back and do that now before you do this next lesson. I want you to get that story fixed in your mind. That story is very important, not only in the doctrine of atonement, but it's also very important in the other doctrines, and I want you to really have that story clear in your mind. I know you've probably read it before, and I trust you have, and as we go through the scriptures, I trust that you have read particularly the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy. They're very important. They're the Pentateuch. They're the basis for all we believe. Genesis is the genesis of everything in the Bible, the beginning. And Exodus, I call the gospel in the Old Testament. And so you need to get a really good handle on Genesis and Exodus. And then when you've read Genesis 22, 1 to 18, the story of Abraham and Isaac, and you've got that in your head again, I want you then to read all of Exodus 12 again, the story of the Passover. Now, I know there's a lot of verses, there's 51 verses, and that's a lot of reading, but I want you to read it again and get that story in your mind, because almost all the doctrines, the progression of almost all the doctrines comes to the Passover at some stage, and the Passover is relevant to almost all the doctrines, and we'll keep coming back and coming back, but I want you to have that story of the Passover really fixed in your head, and I want you to look at it carefully as you go through. Look at the things that we talked about in the last lecture, like lesson 3, but look at the whole overall picture and try and get an idea in your mind of what it's all about. And don't do this lesson 4 until you've done that. Now, you'll have to go away and do it for me. And I want to know, as we come to Atonement lesson 4, that you have done that you've read those 2 over again and really got a handle on them. And then come back and we'll do lesson 4. But I'll just go on with lesson 4 because I've already read them. And so we'll start on the progression of atonement, lesson 4. The children of Israel leave Egypt and journey into the wilderness and come to Mount Sinai. Now, you know, because you've just read Exodus 12 again, that the last verse says, "And it came to pass," this is verse 51 of Exodus 12, "and it came to pass on the selfsame day that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their armies." So they've left Egypt, all right? The children of Israel leave Egypt and they journey into the wilderness and they come to Mount Sinai. Now, certain things happen along the way, and you'll know that story. They go out and they come to the sea, and they can't get across, and God divides the waters, and they go through and they journey into the wilderness. And chapter 19, Exodus chapter 19, and we take the story up again as far as atonement is concerned. Now, we're just tracing that one red thread on the anchor rope, remember? We're not trying to do the whole scriptural thing. We're not trying to learn everything. We're just chasing atonement We're not going off on rabbit trails if we can help it, but we're just chasing that one doctrine. And so the next step in this doctrine is when they come to Mount Sinai. Now, Exodus 19, 1 to 3, it says, in the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day, so after 3 months, they came into the wilderness of Sinai, for they were departed from Rephidim, and they were come to the desert of Sinai, and had pitched in the wilderness, and there camped before the mount. Now, what's the mount? It's Mount Sinai. Get that in your mind. It's very important that we understand that this is where they are. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. And this is the beginning of the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. Now, you know the story how Moses went up to Mount Sinai and got the law, and we think of that as the 10 Commandments, and it is too, but we need to think more carefully about that. From here on in Exodus, right through to the end of the book of Exodus, Moses presents to us what God said to tell him. It says here in verse 3, And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. And from here, right to the end of Exodus, and it then goes on in Leviticus and explains more of it. And then in Deuteronomy, it takes it up again and explains more of it. But everything that we have in the Pentateuch from here on is what God said to Moses, and he says, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. It's all this is what God gave to Moses to tell Israel. And so this is the giving of the law in Mount Sinai. Here God gives them the law and the commandments, and in our progression of doctrine, we say the principles in Genesis, and we've looked at that as far as atonement's concerned, and the principle of atonement is that sin can be covered. It is possible for sin to be covered. The progression must come through the law, and here we come to the actual law. Now, we find the progression in so many different places as we go through these first 5 books, and we really look at all these first 5 books as the law, because the Jews do. They call them the Pentateuch, they call them the law, and we look at them that way. But this is specifically the law that was given to Moses by God on Mount Sinai, and if a doctrine isn't really incorporated into this law, then it's not a doctrine. Right? So let's understand that. If atonement is a doctrine, we will find it in the law, and of course we do. Right, here God gives them the law and the commandments. Contained within the law are all the doctrines of the Christian faith for this church age. Right? And if it's not there, then it's not a doctrine. Right? By the law, we mean, first of all that God gave Moses on Mount Sinai. So everything from here on to the end of the Pentateuch is the law. And this includes, and I'm giving you this for free, this bit, and you might say it's a rabbit trail, but it's not really. It is part of what we're trying to learn. This includes, when God gave them the law, this includes the moral law. Now, what's the moral law? That's the 10 Commandments. And that's what most people, when you say the law, they say, oh, the 10 Commandments. All right? They're right. The 10 Commandments are the moral law. But also included in the law is the ceremonial law. Now the ceremonial law is the feasts and the offerings and the worship of God and the priesthood and the clothes that they wore and the tabernacle and all of those things. They're part of the ceremonial law. Now, the moral law and the ceremonial law are all part of the law. Both of them have equal importance, and both of them are part of the law. And then God also gave them the civil law, and that was the practical rules for life, how they were to live. And we'll see why God did this as we go on. But we've got the three aspects of the law, and they are a trinity. Just like God is a trinity, when he gave the law, God made sure that we understood it's a trinity too. The ceremonial law and the moral law and the civil law. But we really begin it with the moral law, the Ten Commandments, then the ceremonial law comes next, the feasts and the offerings and the priesthood, and then the civil law, the practical laws for living life out from day to day. So let's first of all get some things cleared up. Why did God give the law? Was it to save mankind from sin and death? Well, no, it wasn't. Most definitely it wasn't. Why wasn't it? Because we cannot keep it. Right. Now, if we could keep the law absolutely perfectly and never in any way violate the law, would we then be saved by our own efforts? Well, no, we wouldn't, because we have sin from Adam, imputed from Adam. And so the law is never going to save us, even if we could keep it, but we can't keep it. That's the thing. Throughout Israel's history, they proved to themselves, and we can easily prove to ourselves, that we cannot keep the law, so it cannot save us. It doesn't save us. In fact, quite the opposite. It condemns us. In the Garden of Eden, mankind fell. In Adam, mankind fell. Now, we talked about that. Mankind sinned. He fell into sin. And the law was put there by God to show us just how far we fell. And how far did we fall? We fell right away from the divine favour. We were completely outside the divine favour. We were sinners, totally immersed in sin, controlled by sin. And so the law, when we look at the law, we realise that we are sinners. We realise just how far we are from where God would have us to be. And the law condemns us. And as we read it and we look at it, we say, oh dear, I'm not anywhere near where I should be in regard to being what God expects me to be. And so the Lord judges us by giving us a clear knowledge of our sinful state, but it does not provide salvation from that state. So what was the law there for? Well, the law is diagnostic in nature. Right, we need to understand that. The law is diagnostic in nature. What does that mean? We go along to the doctor, and the law is like a doctor, and so we'll call it doctor law. We go along to the doctor and we say to him, how am I, doctor? And he says, let's do all the tests on you. And he does all the tests and he says, well, look, you are sick. You have a terminal illness. You are going to die. You have sin, the disease of sin. And we say to the law, oh, Dr. Law, what can you cure me? And he said, oh no, that's not my job. He said, you need a specialist for that. He said, my job is to diagnose the problem. And I diagnose the problem, and you have a terminal illness, and that terminal illness is called sin. And we say, but aren't you going to cure me? And he says, no, I only diagnose the problem. If you want to be cured, you have to go somewhere else. You have to go to Dr. Grace. And Dr. Grace can cure this sickness of sin. He's the only one who can. He's a specialist. And Dr. Grace is called Jesus Christ. And so we need to understand that the law is diagnostic in nature. It does, however, lead us to Christ and show us that our salvation is in Him. Dr. Law actually drives us to Dr. Grace. When we look at ourselves in the light of the law, we understand we are sinners, and that's what the law is there for, to teach us. And we understand that sin is terminal. The punishment for sin is death. The wages of sin is death. And if we don't go to Dr. Grace and have that sin dealt with, then we are forever eternally punished for it. And when we come to Dr. Grace, how does he deal with sin? Well, he says to us, for sin to be dealt with, there needs to be atonement. Sin needs to be covered. In fact, it needs to be blotted out, or God cannot be satisfied with what's been done about it. And when this is all done, we can be reconciled to God, and the terminal illness of sin can be cured. Now, let's look back at the law as it affected the children of Israel. Put it back in its context when the children of Israel got it. And we'll just have a look at the children of Israel themselves. For 430 years they had been in Egypt. Exodus 12:40. It says, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the host of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. Now that's a very interesting statement, because it was prophesied long before this that the children of Israel would go down into Egypt and they would be there for 430 years. And they were to the selfsame day. And that's a very interesting fulfillment of prophecy there if we like to look into it, right? But the children of Israel had been in Egypt for 430 years. For many years they'd been slaves. Now let's look back at how they came to be slaves. Exodus 1, 8 to 14. Exodus 1, 8. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt who knew not Joseph. Now remember, the children of Israel came down into Egypt because Joseph got them to come down in the time of the famine. And they lived in Egypt quite happily for a long time, and they bred up, and they got to be more and more of them. 70 of them came down, and 600,000 men, not including women and children, came out. So in 430 years they multiplied incredibly. And so now there arose a new king over Egypt which knew not Joseph, and he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on now, come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigour. That means they really made them work really hard. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field. all their service wherein they made them serve was with rigour. They made them work really, really hard. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, saying, kill the children. When they have children, kill their children. And so we see that they were slaves, and they had lived under the yoke of Egyptian slavery, and that had governed their lives totally.